By the late 1980s, the Middle East stood on the edge of another major conflict. Years of war, economic instability, and political rivalry had created growing tension across the region. At the center of it all was Iraq, led by one of the most controversial leaders of the modern era, Saddam Hussein. Only a few years earlier, Iraq had emerged from a brutal war with neighboring Iran. The conflict had lasted nearly 8 years and caused massive destruction on both sides. Although the fighting eventually ended, Iraq was left economically devastated. The country owed billions of dollars to foreign governments and struggled under enormous financial pressure. Inside Iraq, frustration was growing. The government believed certain neighboring countries, especially Kuwait, were contributing to Iraq's economic problems. Iraqi leaders accused Kuwait of producing excessive amounts of oil, which lowered global oil prices and reduced Iraq's income. Tensions between the two nations increased rapidly as political disputes turned more aggressive. At the same time, Saddam Hussein sought to strengthen Iraq's position as a dominant power in the Middle East. His military had become one of the largest in the region, equipped with tanks, missiles, aircraft, and battle-hardened troops after years of war with Iran. Iraqi leadership believed its military strength gave the country significant influence over regional affairs. But behind the scenes, the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. Iraq began accusing Kuwait of illegally extracting oil from disputed border areas. Diplomatic negotiations failed to reduce tensions, and military forces slowly gathered near the Kuwaiti border. Around the world, governments watched nervously as the crisis escalated. Then in August 1990, the situation exploded. Iraqi forces launched a rapid invasion of Kuwait. Thousands of Iraqi troops and armored vehicles crossed the border, overwhelming Kuwaiti defenses within hours. The attack shocked the international community. Kuwait's military struggled to resist the much larger Iraqi army, and the country was quickly occupied. As Iraqi tanks rolled through Kuwait City, fear spread across the region. Many world leaders worried the invasion was only the beginning. If Iraq continued advancing southward, neighboring Saudi Arabia, and its enormous oil reserves, could also be threatened. The possibility of a larger regional war suddenly became very real. The global response was immediate. The United Nations strongly condemned the invasion and demanded Iraq withdraw from Kuwait. Economic sanctions were imposed while diplomatic pressure intensified. Yet despite international outrage, Iraqi forces remained in control of the country. For the United States and its allies, the stakes were enormous. The Persian Gulf region contained some of the world's most important oil supplies, and instability there threatened global economic security. American officials feared that allowing Iraq to control Kuwait could shift the balance of power across the Middle East. President George H.W. Bush announced a major military response. The United States began deploying troops, aircraft, tanks, and naval forces to Saudi Arabia under an operation known as Desert Shield. The official goal was to defend Saudi Arabia from possible Iraqi attack and prepare for potential military action if diplomacy failed. Soon, one of the largest international military coalitions in modern history began forming. Countries from across the world joined the alliance against Iraq. Coalition forces included troops from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and many other nations. Despite political differences, these countries united around a common objective: force Iraq to leave Kuwait. As military forces poured into the desert, massive bases appeared across Saudi Arabia. Rows of tanks stretched across the sand. Fighter jets filled airfields. Warships moved into the Persian Gulf while soldiers prepared for the possibility of combat. The buildup was unlike anything the region had seen in decades. For many troops arriving in the desert, uncertainty filled the air. No one knew whether Iraq would withdraw peacefully or whether a massive war was about to begin. Intelligence reports warned that Iraqi forces had heavily fortified positions inside Kuwait, including minefields, bunkers, and defensive trenches prepared for a large-scale invasion. Meanwhile, Saddam Hussein refused to back down. Iraqi leadership portrayed the conflict as a struggle against foreign intervention, while coalition governments argued they were defending international law and regional stability. Diplomatic efforts continued, but tension grew with every passing week. Television networks around the world broadcast images of military convoys crossing the desert and fighter jets preparing for war. For the first time, millions of people could watch a major international crisis unfold almost in real time. The world waited anxiously to see whether diplomacy could prevent conflict, or whether the Middle East was about to erupt into full-scale war. As deadlines passed and negotiations failed, coalition forces prepared for combat. Hundreds of thousands of troops now stood ready beneath the desert sun. Advanced aircraft, missiles, and armored divisions waited for orders. The largest military buildup since the Cold War was nearing its breaking point. And soon, the skies above Iraq and Kuwait would explode with the opening strikes of Operation Desert Storm. On January 17, 1991, the silence of the desert night was shattered by explosions across Iraq and Kuwait. After months of military buildup and failed diplomatic negotiations, the United States and its coalition allies officially launched Operation Desert Storm. The Gulf War had begun. Within hours, one of the largest and most technologically advanced air campaigns in military history unfolded across the skies of the Middle East. Coalition aircraft surged toward Iraqi targets while missiles streaked through the darkness, marking the start of a massive assault designed to cripple Iraq's military power before a ground invasion even began. For many people watching around the world, the war seemed almost unreal. Television networks broadcast live footage of glowing explosions over Baghdad while reporters described missile strikes happening in real time. Never before had a major war been shown so directly to global audiences. Millions watched from their homes as the night sky lit up with anti-aircraft fire and distant blasts. But behind the dramatic images was a carefully planned military strategy. Coalition commanders intended to overwhelm Iraq with precision air power. The objective was clear: destroy Iraqi command centers, weaken air defenses, eliminate communication systems, and reduce the ability of Iraqi forces to fight effectively once ground combat began. The opening attacks focused on critical military targets. Cruise missiles launched from ships and submarines crossed hundreds of miles before striking command facilities deep inside Iraq. Advanced aircraft targeted radar systems, air defense installations, and military headquarters. The goal was to blind and isolate Iraqi forces as quickly as possible. Among the most feared weapons used during the campaign were stealth aircraft. The United States deployed the highly secretive F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, an aircraft specifically designed to avoid radar detection. Flying through heavily defended airspace, these jets struck strategic targets with remarkable precision. For many viewers around the world, the technology seemed futuristic. Smart bombs guided by lasers and advanced targeting systems hit buildings with extraordinary accuracy compared to older forms of bombing. Military analysts described the campaign as the arrival of a new era of warfare, one dominated by technology, precision, and overwhelming air superiority. Coalition aircraft operated continuously. Fighter jets, bombers, reconnaissance planes, electronic warfare aircraft, and refueling tankers filled the skies day and night. Aircraft carriers stationed in the Persian Gulf launched waves of combat missions while Allied air bases across the region supported non-stop operations. The scale of the assault was enormous. Thousands of sorties were flown during the campaign, targeting Iraqi military infrastructure across a vast area. Airfields, bunkers, missile sites, ammunition depots, communication networks, and armored positions came under constant attack. Iraq attempted to fight back. Air defense systems fired anti-aircraft missiles and artillery into the skies above major cities. Searchlights scanned through smoke-filled darkness trying to locate incoming aircraft. Iraqi pilots launched fighter jets to challenge coalition forces, but they faced overwhelming technological disadvantages. Coalition air superiority quickly became clear. Advanced training, superior aircraft, and coordinated operations allowed coalition forces to dominate the skies. Many Iraqi aircraft were destroyed, damaged, or forced to flee to neighboring countries to avoid destruction. Still, Iraqi leadership searched for ways to shift the momentum of the war. One of Iraq's most controversial responses involved launching Scud missiles toward Israel and Saudi Arabia. Iraqi officials hoped these attacks would create political divisions inside the coalition, especially among Arab nations participating in the alliance against Iraq. The missile attacks created fear and uncertainty. Air raid sirens sounded in cities as civilians rushed toward shelters fearing chemical attacks. Patriot missile defense systems were deployed to intercept incoming Scuds, and dramatic footage of missile interceptions became some of the most recognizable images of the Gulf War. Despite these efforts, coalition momentum continued growing. The air campaign inflicted severe damage on Iraq's military infrastructure. Communication systems struggled to function under constant bombardment, while supply networks and defensive positions faced repeated attacks. Coalition commanders believed the bombing campaign was successfully weakening Iraqi forces before any major ground operation began. Yet the war also carried a human cost beyond the battlefield. Explosions struck urban areas while civilians endured fear, destruction, and uncertainty during weeks of air raids. Smoke rose over cities as electricity and infrastructure systems suffered damage. Although coalition leaders emphasized precision targeting, the realities of modern warfare still affected ordinary people living beneath the bombing campaign. Inside Iraq, soldiers and civilians alike faced relentless pressure from continuous attacks. Coalition aircraft could strike at almost any time, day or night. The psychological effect of non-stop bombing became a powerful weapon itself. Iraqi troops stationed in Kuwait and along defensive lines endured exhaustion, fear, and isolation as the campaign intensified. Meanwhile, coalition forces prepared for the next phase of the war. After weeks of successful air operations, military planners believed Iraqi defenses had been significantly weakened. Tanks, armored vehicles, and hundreds of thousands of coalition troops stood ready across the desert waiting for the order to advance. The skies above the Gulf War had become a demonstration of modern military power unlike anything seen before. Precision weapons, stealth aircraft, satellite technology, and live television coverage transformed the conflict into a new kind of war, one watched by the entire world in real time. But while the air campaign dominated headlines, an even larger confrontation was approaching. Far below the roaring fighter jets and exploding missiles, massive armies waited in the desert for the ground war that would decide the fate of Kuwait. After weeks of relentless airstrikes, coalition commanders believed the time had come for the next phase of the war. Iraqi military infrastructure had suffered heavy damage, communication systems were weakened, and defensive positions across Kuwait faced constant bombardment. Now, the coalition prepared to launch a massive ground offensive that would determine the outcome of the Gulf War. In February 1991, the attack began. Hundreds of thousands of coalition troops moved across the desert as tanks, armored vehicles, artillery units, and mechanized infantry advanced toward Iraqi positions. The scale of the operation was enormous. For soldiers on the ground, the horizon itself seemed filled with military convoys stretching endlessly across the sand. The battlefield environment was harsh and unforgiving. Blowing desert winds reduced visibility while smoke from burning oil and explosions darkened the skies. Troops operated in extreme conditions surrounded by minefields, defensive trenches, and the constant possibility of chemical weapons attacks. But despite Iraqi preparations, coalition forces held major advantages. Advanced technology, superior coordination, satellite navigation, air superiority, and modern armored warfare tactics gave coalition commanders confidence that Iraqi defenses could be overwhelmed quickly. Many Iraqi troops had already endured weeks of bombing and were exhausted before the ground war even began. One of the most important elements of the offensive was a strategy later known as the left hook. Instead of launching a direct frontal assault into the strongest Iraqi defensive lines in Kuwait, coalition forces carried out a massive flanking maneuver through the western desert. Armored divisions swept around Iraqi positions from an unexpected direction, striking vulnerable areas and disrupting command structures. The maneuver caught many Iraqi units by surprise. Coalition tanks moved rapidly across open desert terrain while attack helicopters and aircraft provided support from above. Communication breakdowns inside Iraqi forces created confusion as defensive lines began collapsing under pressure. For many coalition soldiers, the speed of the advance was astonishing. Military planners had expected difficult resistance in some areas, but numerous Iraqi troops surrendered quickly after the ground assault began. Years of war with Iran, combined with weeks of coalition bombing, had weakened morale across many Iraqi units stationed in Kuwait. Still, intense combat occurred in several sectors. Armored battles erupted across the desert as tanks exchanged fire in some of the largest mechanized engagements since World War II. Explosions lit up the battlefield while artillery thundered across the open terrain. Coalition forces pushed deeper into Iraqi-controlled areas with overwhelming momentum. As Iraqi defenses weakened further, coalition troops advanced toward Kuwait City. 4 months, Kuwait had remained under Iraqi occupation. Now, coalition forces entered the city while Iraqi troops retreated northward. Kuwaiti civilians celebrated the liberation of their country as military vehicles moved through the streets. Images of celebration spread around the world. Crowds waved flags while people embraced coalition soldiers who had helped drive Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. For many observers, the liberation marked the successful completion of the coalition's primary objective. But as Iraqi troops withdrew, another disaster unfolded across the desert. Retreating Iraqi forces set fire to hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells. Massive flames erupted into the sky, creating one of the worst environmental catastrophes of the war. Thick black smoke covered the desert while burning oil transformed entire regions into scenes of destruction and chaos. Daylight itself seemed to disappear beneath dark clouds of smoke drifting across the Middle East. The retreat also produced some of the most controversial moments of the conflict. As Iraqi military convoys attempted to escape northward, coalition aircraft attacked vehicles along major highways leading out of Kuwait. Destroyed tanks, trucks, and military equipment stretched across roads in scenes later referred to as the Highway of Death. Images from the area sparked debate around the world. Some viewed the attacks as necessary military action against retreating forces. Others questioned the scale of destruction and the human cost involved. The scenes became powerful reminders that even short wars could produce devastating consequences. Yet despite the intensity of the fighting, the ground campaign moved with remarkable speed. In only around 100 hours, coalition forces achieved their primary military objectives. Iraqi forces were pushed out of Kuwait, defensive positions collapsed, and the coalition declared victory. Compared to many previous wars, the operation ended with surprising rapidity. Coalition commanders praised the effectiveness of modern military coordination, precision air support, and fast-moving armored warfare. Around the world, many observers viewed Operation Desert Storm as a demonstration of overwhelming technological and military superiority. But the war's conclusion also raised difficult questions. Although Kuwait had been liberated, Saddam Hussein remained in power inside Iraq. Some military leaders and political observers wondered whether coalition forces should continue advancing deeper into Iraqi territory. Others feared expanding the war could create even greater instability across the region. For soldiers returning from combat, the memories of the desert battlefield remained unforgettable: burning oil fields, destroyed vehicles, endless sandstorms, and the terrifying speed of modern mechanized warfare. The ground offensive had succeeded militarily. Yet beneath the celebrations and declarations of victory, the Gulf War was already leaving behind political tensions, environmental destruction, and unanswered questions that would continue shaping the Middle East for years to come. When Operation Desert Storm officially came to an end in early 1991, coalition leaders declared the mission a success. Kuwait had been liberated, Iraqi forces had been pushed back, and one of the most powerful military campaigns of the modern era had concluded in just a matter of weeks. But while the fighting had stopped, the consequences of the war were only beginning. Across Kuwait and Iraq, the scars of conflict remained visible everywhere. Destroyed military vehicles littered the desert, damaged buildings stood in ruins, and massive oil fires continued burning across the landscape. Thick black smoke filled the skies for months, creating environmental devastation that shocked the world. The burning oil wells became one of the defining images of the Gulf War. Retreating Iraqi forces had intentionally ignited hundreds of Kuwaiti oil facilities before withdrawing. Flames rose high into the air while rivers of oil spread across the desert. Environmental experts warned that the damage could affect air quality, wildlife, and regional ecosystems for years. For civilians living in the region, the war had brought fear, displacement, and uncertainty. Families fled combat zones while infrastructure damage disrupted electricity, water systems, and daily life. Although the war itself had been relatively short compared to many conflicts, its impact on ordinary people remained significant. Thousands of soldiers also returned home carrying physical and psychological scars from the battlefield. Many veterans described the stress of operating in harsh desert conditions surrounded by constant danger. In the years following the war, debates emerged surrounding unexplained health problems reported by some veterans, a condition often referred to as Gulf War syndrome. Medical researchers and governments investigated possible causes, including chemical exposure, environmental hazards, and battlefield conditions. The discussions continued for years, adding another layer of controversy to the legacy of the conflict. Politically, the war reshaped the balance of power in the Middle East. The United States emerged from the Gulf War with increased military influence across the region. American forces maintained a stronger presence in the Middle East after the conflict, while coalition victory reinforced the image of the United States as the world's dominant military power following the end of the Cold War. At the same time, Iraq remained unstable. Although coalition forces had defeated the Iraqi military and liberated Kuwait, Saddam Hussein stayed in power. Some critics later argued that ending the war without removing the Iraqi leadership left unresolved tensions that would contribute to future conflicts in the region. Questions surrounding the war's long-term impact became increasingly important over time. Did the coalition stop at the right moment? Could the war have ended differently? Would future instability in Iraq eventually lead to even larger conflicts? These debates continued long after the ceasefire. Operation Desert Storm also transformed modern warfare itself. The conflict demonstrated the effectiveness of precision-guided weapons, stealth aircraft, satellite navigation, and advanced battlefield coordination. Military analysts around the world studied the war carefully, viewing it as a model for future high-technology combat operations. For many observers, the Gulf War represented the arrival of a new era of military power. Coalition aircraft struck targets with remarkable accuracy, while real-time communication and advanced surveillance systems allowed commanders to coordinate forces more efficiently than ever before. Modern technology appeared capable of changing warfare entirely. But the war also revealed the limitations of technology. Despite military victory, political tensions across the Middle East did not disappear. The region remained unstable, and future conflicts would eventually emerge involving many of the same countries and issues connected to the Gulf War. Another major change involved the role of media. Operation Desert Storm became known as one of the first modern wars broadcast live on television to global audiences. Millions of people watched missile strikes, press briefings, and battlefield footage almost in real time. News coverage transformed public perception of war, making distant conflicts feel immediate and personal. For the first time, many viewers experienced war not through newspapers days later, but live from their television screens. This constant media coverage shaped how governments managed information during conflict. Military briefings, camera footage, and carefully controlled reporting became central parts of the public narrative surrounding the war. Yet beneath the advanced technology and dramatic television coverage remained the harsh reality of warfare itself. Behind every missile strike and military operation were human lives affected by destruction, fear, injury, and loss. Soldiers on both sides experienced the chaos of combat while civilians struggled to survive in regions torn apart by conflict. Over the years, historians continued examining Operation Desert Storm from multiple perspectives. Some viewed it as one of the most successful military campaigns in modern history, swift, coordinated, and strategically effective. Others focused on the environmental damage, civilian suffering, and long-term political consequences left behind after the fighting ended. Both perspectives became part of the war's legacy. Today, Operation Desert Storm remains one of the defining military events of the late 20th century. It demonstrated the overwhelming power of modern coalition warfare while also revealing how even short conflicts can create consequences lasting for generations. The Gulf War may have ended quickly on the battlefield, but its political, environmental, and human impact continued echoing across the Middle East and the wider world long after the desert skies finally fell silent.